Well, hello everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. My name is Jason Levine, and thank you so much for joining me today on the Friday Masterclass, where today we're going to begin a whole series of new and sometimes collaborative masterclasses going through the entire process of starting to work with Premiere Pro, After Effects, Audition, and kind of taking you through everything you kind of need to know, not only to get up to speed on all the latest versions of the apps, but if you're joining us from one of our new streaming locations today, and I'm talking about No Film School, so lovely to have you joining us today, this is going to help you work towards getting Premiere Pro certified so that you can begin teaching this stuff wherever, anywhere in the world. So again, a big shout out to No Film School joining us today on the Masterclass. So wonderful to have you. Thank you so much. And they've got some mods. I believe Yaroslav is in there. It's going to be helping modify that chat. Of course, we're coming to you live across a whole series of networks. We're on YouTube, Behance, Adobe Live, Twitter. I think we're on the Facebooks as well as LinkedIn. So thank you so much for joining. Now, of course, I'm monitoring all the chats. And today for No Film School, I will also be checking out your chats. For those of you who aren't on that YouTube channel, and if you want to get right in front of my eyes, b.net/Adobe Live. That is the chat you want to be in if you want to ask questions while we are going live. That's the one that I will see right in front of my face. So thank you so much for joining. A couple of quick shouts, of course, before we get started. I see we've got Joseph Watts and Havhanis and Hari and Jakir Hassan, Crystal Brooks, Brandon Rex, Shlomi Arditi, great to see you. Banderoism, Linda Lawson, Danny Brady, great to see you as well. Laura Staneva, Umacorn, Mustafa, Bliss Golden Rose, Theo, Michael Wheeler, Tim, and many more. Kiss My Creative, great to see you. Thank you so much for joining. Okay, so we're going to get started today. And again, this is going to take us all the way back to the beginning. So one thing I want to point out here is that this whole series, and as the title suggests, this is Introduction to Premiere. So we're really going to go through starting from nothing, beginning the process, assuming that you are new to Premiere. So if you already know how to start a project, ingest media, familiar with the tools and workspaces and setting up panels and all the various views and just the basic fundamentals of just getting started, well, this is a good refresher. I'm certainly not going to tell you to not watch. Well, that would be insane. But just keep in mind, that's where we are today. This is all about the fundamentals. And we're really going to start right from starting the new project. Now, for those of you new to the masterclasses, for watching via NFS, I always try and sort of start these live streams with some fun stuff, random things. And I just saw that Bliss Golden Rose was requesting that I should put up the pic that I posted on Twitter the other day. The rest of the world needs to see Throwback Jason. And that's very kind of you, Golden Rose. Thank you. And I will oblige you this one time. So this was a picture. I was actually talking about this on Twitter. I did if you're familiar with this company called Legacy Box, and they have this, there's lots of companies that do this kind of stuff. In this case, they transferred and restored a whole bunch of photos, VHS tapes, even 8mm film. And for my, you'll learn, those of you watching on NFS, you're gonna hear it and see it like it is. Here I am, circa 1988. Also, the last time that I had short hair. I'm going to point out. Oh, what just happened there? Oh, sorry, I went into my screen there. So yeah, this is the last time I had short hair, and this is my very early studio in 1988. This October 1st, actually, as well. So yeah, showing off that is the classic Mac Plus, 1 megabyte of memory. A lot of people on Twitter are asking about that. Also, for you audio nerds out there, that is an original Akai S612 12-bit sampler with the MD280 disk drive. Classic and early hip-hop. This predates the S900 and S950. For those of you out there who do any kind of music like that, some classic amplification here, and then a whole bunch of old keyboards, not to mention, as someone on Twitter said, acoustically sound wood paneling. Yeah, and disco carpet. Not to mention white socks, acid wash jeans, and a mock turtleneck. And that's enough of that. Okay, so Karen Brisa, fantastic. All right, thank you so much. All right, very, very cool. Hari, how do I maintain your hair? Don't I feel discomfort? Never. Never. Actually, sometimes it is a drag. What can I say? All right, so here we are inside of Premiere Pro. Again, this is the current version that you can download via Creative Cloud Desktop. Of course, if you don't already have it installed, go into your Creative Cloud desktop app here, and this is where you can access all of the Creative Cloud applications. It's also worth pointing out, now we're not going to get into the beta of Premiere Pro, but if you are a Creative Cloud member, you'll notice, in particular for you video users, if you go into beta apps, you will also have access. Now, you might not have access to Photoshop and Illustrator. I think that's just me because of my internal stuff at Adobe, but you will have access to all of the video applications, including, but not limited to, Premiere, Media Encoder, Rush, After Effects, Character Animator, and Audition. So if you want to check out the beta apps, you can access this and have these installed at the same time, concurrently, as the release versions as well. And the good news is, for Premiere users, this is where we tend to, almost on the daily, update and add features that we're working on. So there's no requirement. You don't have to sign up for anything. Those of you on No Film School, if you were in some of our pre-releases in the past, you know, typically with a beta pre-release, there's sort of, you have to file X number of bugs or do these things. You don't have to do that. Here's why you want to do it. You get to see stuff before it gets fully developed. You get to comment on those features before they're fully developed. You can do that from within the beta app, and it gets right in front of the engineer's eyes. No joke. It's awesome. Check it out. We're going to come back to that at another time. All right. So let's begin our project in Premiere. Again, assuming you've never done this before, naturally, of course, we're going to start with the New Project button. So let's come up here to the top of the screen. We're going to give this a name. We'll call this NFS 01. Tell it where we want it to go. I gotta select the folder that I created here on the desktop. Go into this one right here. All right. And then we have some basic settings. Now, in general, and this is the kind of stuff which we're going to go through today because these are the things that most people just click through, never really understand, never know where they are. And oddly enough, I just saw two questions, not but 2 days ago, one on Twitter, one on YouTube, about where are the scratch disk locations? Where are my CC library? Like, they were looking for a lot of these temp files and where they were stored and didn't even know where that existed, right? This is something which, if you use Photoshop, you know offhand pretty well. You're pretty familiar with how to access those scratch disks. But unless you pay attention to this dialog, you're probably not going to know. So at the top here in the General tab, first and foremost, we have video rendering and playback. Now, this current machine that I'm demoing on today, this is an iMac. So by default, this is going to use Apple's Metal GPU acceleration. This is enabled by default. You will want to have this enabled by default, okay? GPU acceleration is going to allow you to use things like our Lumetri color panel, I don't know if it's all yet, but most of our effects, I believe all of our color effects, or at least 32-bit color effects, these will all be accelerated. So not only will they give you better playback performance, but when it comes time to render, you're going to reap those benefits as well. Now, you do in some cases have the option to also run software-only mode, and there's sometimes reasons why you do that. In general, though, if you're looking for that sort of best performance, first blush experience, stick with GPU acceleration enabled. Now, this is on the Mac side. A couple caveats here. If you're on an M1 Mac, this is going to be grayed out because we also have Premiere Pro running natively sans Rosetta on the M1 Mac platform. It will be great because we're actually using that whole chipset to tap into GPU acceleration. It's not Metal specific. So if you see and notice that that's grayed out on an M1 Mac, that is by design. You are still getting GPU acceleration. And if you're working on an M1, particularly an M1 Pro Max, the experience is pretty freaking amazing. If you're on a Windows machine and you might be using an NVIDIA card, you may also see in this drop-down menu access to CUDA, C-U-D-A, acceleration. So we can also work with NVIDIA CUDA for GPU acceleration. I believe on Windows you will also still have OpenCL support. It's been since deprecated on the Mac side. I don't know if it's still on the Windows version offhand as of this latest version. I believe it is. But either way, once again, you'll have OpenCL, you may have CUDA, and you'll have software available to you as well. So again, you want to keep these on by default. It is recommended for good reason. Now, these other settings here, video, audio, capture, again, how you display, time code, display format, milliseconds. Unless you have an express reason to change this, I would probably leave these by the defaults. These are pretty standard things. Again, unlikely you're going to go into feet and frames for 16 mil unless you've transferred that footage and need to work with that time code. But these are just some of the defaults. Again, capture, HDV. I'm not even entirely sure why that's even still there, frankly. But you only have that one option in this case anyway. Don't worry about that. And then you have some color management here. Now, for most people, you're never going to have to worry about any of this if you are shooting HDR. And in the case of something like, for instance, the iPhone 13 Pro Max, which now shoots ProRes 422 HDR 4K, this just allows you to manage how you're displaying and handling HDR graphics, white and nits specifically, on screen here. The default is this setting. Generally, you're going to leave it at the default. If there's a reason to change the HLG PQ percentage balance difference here, this is where you can access that, as well as the 3D LUT interpolation as well. And I believe you have trilinear and tetrahedral, which is going to give you GPU acceleration. If you are working with 3D lookup tables, most of you probably are not. Okay. Next tab in here are the scratch disks, okay? Now again, if you're coming from Photoshop, you know this, day one, this is something they teach you when you're learning about Photoshop. Here, of course, in video though, got a lot of things that are leveraging scratch disk space. Captured video, captured audio, video previews, audio previews, project autosave, CC libraries downloads, motion graphics template media. So the last two of these are sort of related to, again, working with content that you're accessing via some of our libraries, content, or panels. In this case, CC libraries, which we'll get to in a later episode, and motion graphics templates, which you can build in After Effects. These can be stored in CC libraries. And this includes everything from lower thirds to graphical transitions. Basically, all of the kind of graphical overlays that you'll see on a typical edit, whether on YouTube or on broadcast. This can be considered a specific motion graphics template. Now, the actual motion graphics template itself, also known as a .mogrt, M-O-G-R-T, this is something which you can download and license for free from within the Essential Graphics panel. We'll cover a little bit of that today. And you can also build these elements in After Effects and save them as .mogurts, because then they become editable from within Premiere itself. So you can actually work with live non-rendered animations in the Premiere timeline that were actually fed via After Effects and still manipulate and modify and edit them and customize them as you're doing your edit. I'm not going to cover that today. That's next week's episode. We're going to touch upon that. And then we'll have a whole episode dedicated to Mogurt creation. But just so you're aware, all right? So this is where you choose all those locations. And you'll see that the default, of course, is to keep everything basically same as project, but you can tell it wherever you want your media to go. So actually, in general, for like project auto saves, I'll usually place those either with the project, or sometimes I leave it in Creative Cloud. I used to keep everything like the autosave stuff in Creative Cloud so that it just always synchronizes. It's always there. It's easy. But this is where you can determine all of that. And then you have, lastly, ingest settings. Now, we're not going to cover specifically ingest today, but for those of you, the uninitiated, what are the ingest settings? Well, if you look at our little drop-down menus here, this is kind of going to give you everything you need to know. This is going to allow you to, one, copy the media. So if you're transferring from, again, maybe a phone or from a media card, SD card, XD card, what have you, do you want to just pull the media off? Do you want to copy it? Do you want to work off of the media itself? Now, Premiere will allow you to edit off of an SD or XD card or CF card or whatever. Is that the best way to do it? Meh. You know, I wouldn't. Can you? Absolutely. Should you? If it's like really short and doesn't matter. In general, you want to copy that media to some kind of physical drive, whether it's an SSD or an HDD, whatever. But this is going to allow you to do that. Then we have transcode, right? So copy is just going to take the media as it is in its native format and put it somewhere else. And that'll be where you're accessing that media for your project. Transcode is going to allow you to essentially convert that media into what is sometimes known as an intermediate format, or something which is more ideal for editing, right? So just because you're shooting, let's say older school, so I even have, like, here's my old school iPhone 10, right? This just shoots standard MP4 H.264s. H.264 is not the greatest format for editing. It's a little bit heavy on the decompressed side for playback. It's a delivery format. It's what we provide to YouTube and Vimeo and Facebook and if we're just sharing media with people, we give them MP4s. It's not really an editing format. Not that you can't edit with it, and I'll be editing with it today. But the idea is if you wanted to convert that into something else, into a more standard format, for instance, something like an Apple ProRes, okay, or DNX HD, or GoPro Cineform, which is again a classic intermediate codec Any pro will tell you that. And you can see some of the other options here, XD Cam, XAVC, IMX. This is going to allow you to do that, okay? You also have the option here to create proxies. Now, again, we're going to spend a whole episode on proxies. What are proxies? Smaller, lightweight versions of your media, which make editing easier on any kind of machine. So let's say you're shooting 4K HDR, but you're going to be editing this on, you know, like just a regular sort of 2018 laptop. Mac, Windows, doesn't matter. Well, 4K HDR is pretty heavy media, so maybe you don't want to be natively editing that 4K HDR. You just want a smaller, lightweight version to edit, and then you want the ability to quickly reconnect or swap between the proxy, the lightweight, lower quality version, and the full quality version. That's what that's going to do, okay? And then you have copy and create proxies. So it'll copy the native media over to a drive and simultaneously create those lightweight versions which you're going to use for editing, all right? All of this can be set up and can happen in this new project dialog right here, all right? So I'm gonna click OK on this. It's gonna bring us into Premiere Pro, and let's check the chats here and see what's going on. All right. Okay. Ashley Bramwell, looking forward to those 27-inch M1 Max. Yeah, me too. Anson, oh, that's so nice of you to say. All right. Hari Banda, can you talk about QuickTime versus IMPEG rendering? I use QuickTime for smooth previews on Windows and video. Just real quickly, now, again, we'll get into this in just a moment when we get into sequence settings. The short answer is, Hari, yes, I would absolutely recommend QuickTime ProRes over MPEG full stop. And we'll get into the reasons why later. But yes, you're doing it the way I would do it, if that tells you anything. All right? Very cool. Okay. All right, and checking over here, let's see. Hello, hello. All right. A lot of people in here today. This was great. Okay, Tim is saying he's not seeing OpenCL anymore. Okay, so maybe it's been deprecated. Oh, but David Shuker is saying he's getting it on his desktop. So I don't know what Tim's doing. All right, Vincent, here we go. Okay, so now we're gonna talk about import footage or ingest footage, okay? So lots of different ways to just import. Now again, we're not gonna focus on the copy, transcode, proxy thing today because you don't need that to just start editing in Premiere. I'm gonna show you a couple different ways to just import media. So inside the project panel, which you will see by default, probably docked in the upper left-hand corner. By the way, a lot of this can be determined by our various workspaces. All right, and if you take a look here, sorry, I'm gonna close that. Under workspaces, you're gonna see that we have a whole series of different workspaces based on, you know, different sort of standard setup. So assembling a timeline, audio work, captions and graphics. These are just sort of standard ones that we built for you. I can't even remember what the standard one is that opens up with Premiere the first time. But in any case, the window menu is where you can access all the various panels that you need to begin starting. So the one that you want to be able to import media is your project panel, which you can see is open and docked right over here. And directly from the project panel, you'll see you can import media to start. You can do that simply by double-clicking right in this panel. You can, of course, also go to File, Import, however you want to do it. I like to double-click in here most of the time. Now, I'm going to tell you real quickly, this process will change fairly soon. You'll still be able to do it this way, but in the Premiere Pro beta, a couple months ago, actually about 8 months ago, we introduced a beta UI UX import experience. You can check this out today in the Premiere Pro beta. It is very visual. It actually functions a lot more like Prelude and Adobe Premiere Rush, and tell us what you think of it. You can check that out. But today, this is how you're going to do it. So I'm going to navigate to wherever my media is. I'm going to select my media here. In fact, here, I'll even grab that audio file and click Import. And just like that, it brings my media into the project panel. Nothing fancy, nothing terribly complex here. Now, where this starts to get cool and interesting are in the ways that you can view this content. So first of all, when you bring it in by default, this is in the list metadata view. And again, you're going to get all of the nerdy detail here in today's class. That's what this is about. We're not really focused on editing. These are the fundamentals to get you to editing, all right? So metadata is important for a variety of reasons. One, of course, is going to tell you the attributes of your media. I can't emphasize the necessity of this enough, right? Particularly in a time where We're shooting on lots of different formats, lots of different devices. Some shoot at 30, some shoot at 2997. A lot of people are shooting by default on DSLRs and mirrorless at 60 frames or 120 frames. So you've got mixed frame rates. Most of your video audio content is going to be 48K, but if you're coming from audio only or grabbing media, say from, well, I said from CDs, are you living in 1994? But if you are, and you're ripping from there, that audio is going to come in at 44,100 hertz. So you've got a lot of mixed formats. You need to know what you're playing with before you start. Now here's the thing. Premiere Pro lets you drop 25 frames per second, 30 frames, 60, 120, 48K, 96K. All this content can coexist in a sequence. We'll let you do that. But there's certain things you need to be aware of if you've got, say, super high frame rate content, more ideal for slow motion, versus something that's shot at 25 frames per second, right? And you also might have variable aspect ratios and frame sizes, right? Standard UHD, but what if something is instead of 3840 2160, it's 4096 by 2160? So you may have to do some scaling or reframing to make things fit a particular frame size aspect ratio. That's why you have this metadata in here. And you can see as we go down the list, this is showing you just a lot of the default stuff, you know, all the video info here. Again, here's a clip, this particular one, 1536 by 768. All right, this obviously these came from, they named these in their metadata. Well, I think these all came from red sources. And then you have at the top of the project panel, this little hamburger menu. And if we click on that, all right, and go to the bottom here, bring it on screen so you can see, you'll see that it says metadata display. So this is where you can now customize the metadata that's shown inside of that project panel. All right, so if we just go in there real quickly, all right, we're not going to go through all of this, but you'll see, again, if you've done this in Photoshop or Bridge, a lot of these, all this EXIF stuff, right? This is all in Bridge. You can see there's even separate settings for camera raw, you know, and all of your broadcast AS11 metadata. This is all contained in here. All right, and then we have just the Premiere Pro project standards, which include, these are all the standard ones. So label, frame rate, media start, media end, video in, out, duration, right? We can scroll through all of this, subclip, you know, a lot of this, you know, tape name, like this stuff for me, I never need this. I don't need any of these things. I would take these out, right? You know, proxies, capture settings, status, scene, shot, good. So if you mark your takes, all that metadata can be displayed, and so on and so forth. So you can customize what you want and then save those settings as a customized layout. So you only see the metadata you want. So if that were the case, so let's say I don't need media start, media end, and I don't want video in, out. I will leave duration, and I'm going to take out log notes. I'm going to take out capture. I'm going to take out scene and shot, good, and hide. And that's all I want. I'm going to save this. Jason's preferred, click OK. It's now selected, click OK. And now when we go into the dialog, you can see it's minimized what's being shown on screen, all right? So a really simple, easy way to display necessary metadata for your content. Okay, now that's in the traditional list view. How long is he gonna spend in the project panel? Longer, because there's other ways to view your content. Now, if we go to the bottom here of the panel, here's our list view. Then we have the icon view. No surprise there, that's what this looks like, all right? Real simple, real easy. And then we have something called the freeform view. Now we're gonna come back to that because I wanna import some more footage in the meantime, all right? So for this, I'm going to go up to my window menu here, and I'm going to pull up the media browser. Now again, if you're new to Premiere, or if you've worked in After Effects, we actually have this same panel in both Premiere, After Effects, and Audition as well. Think of this as kind of like your, it's not unlike your why can't I think of the word I want? In Windows, I don't use Windows enough. Now I'm forgetting. Brain farts, live. That's what happens. Media Browser is going to allow you to access all your drives and do this a little bit more visually. So in this case, I'm going to go to this one here, open up this folder. I've got some video from San Francisco and Arizona. And if I want, I can select my clips in the panel here. All right, I can do multi-select. You'll notice that as I hover over the media, this is doing a hover scrub. Okay, you can also click and play the media. All right. You even have the ability to set in and outs on the media simply by using I and O on your keyboard, and that's showing you the section there where I've set the in and out on that particular clip. All right, I'm going to choose a couple of different clips here, like this, and simply drag that footage from the media browser into my project panel. All right. Now, again, we're not ingest, copy, proxy doing. We're just basically, we're leaving the media where it is for this project, and the project is pointing to it, right? If I were doing a copy, I'd be moving it from that drive to some other place. The media would still come in instantly. But the point is, we're just, without doing a copy, as I showed you before on the ingest settings, it's just linking to wherever that media lives. We're not moving anything. So keep that in mind, right? It's important because it's real easy, especially if you've got lots of folders and lots of sources, to kind of get lost with things. If I'm, wanting to have everything sort of together and easy for archiving and storage later, I will copy the media to one folder, one location, just so that everything I need is in one place. Now you can also do this at the end of your project with our project manager. That will come a little bit later, but just keep that in mind, right? It's a good practice to kind of copy, especially because, well, the hard drive space for us today, there's a lot more of it, and we just know that video files are big, right? It always used to be like, I don't want to copy, the media is so large. Yeah, the media is large. Yeah. 4K is large, try 8K. 8K sucks. It's really big. I mean, it's beautiful, but it's big media, right? So you got to copy it. What you can also do with the media browser view, which I love, this is just a nice little UX element that we have, kudos to our engineers, is that you can have multiple media browser panels. So again, I can access, a different series of folders. Oh, that's actually not the one I want. Here, let me go into here and pull in different media. So here we go. This one here. There we are. All right. And again, I can select a couple of these clips. Okay, some of these, again, some HFR content. Drag those in. And just like that, they now live inside my project panel. Okay, quick questions here. Hello, Philip Allen. All right, Kiri Morning, does this apply to CS5 as well? I'm going to go out on a limb here, Kiri, and say, if you're working with CS5, no. I mean, some of what I'm talking about applies, but that's over 10 years ago. There just are, first of all, there's just a whole series of formats that aren't even supported in CS5 because they didn't exist yet. So a lot of what I'm showing you applies conceptually, but the UI and things have changed, okay? Okay, Shlomi's asking, what about aperture and shutter and ISO and EXIF? It does not appear, so there is a plugin. Now, again, that metadata that you're seeing there, that's specific to stills imagery metadata. That's why I said you'll know that from Photoshop. If you're, there are some third-party plugins that will do that same metadata, but each camera manufacturer stores that info a little bit differently. So if you're talking like red, for instance, if you're working with native red footage in Premiere Pro, we actually have, there's something called the red source settings panel. We access that automatically. So any R3D media that you have, all of that EXIF data, ISO, shutter speed, aperture, everything, it's all stored in the media because the camera knows how to store that metadata in a special container for R3D files. Standard DSLRs don't do that for video, okay? So there are ways that you can import that content, and you can even do it through that metadata panel there. But again, the way Nikon does it versus Sony versus Canon on standard like mirrorless cameras shooting MP4, they don't write that metadata. It's not standard. It's standard, we know this for photography, it's not standard for video files. Thank you, A Lady in the Life of Tate. Okay, very good. All right. Paloma, viewing the 8K TVs blew my mind. Yes. Yes, yes, yes. CT, I thought he'd refer to Bridge, right? I did earlier, you missed it. Okay, so we were just talking about the project panel. Last thing I want to show you here is the freeform view, all right? So again, freeform is just a different way. I'm going to make this full screen, which by the way, on the US keyboard, the tilde key, if I hover over a panel and hit the tilde key. Now this is different on all international keyboards going full screen, so I can't tell you the keyboard shortcut for that. If you want to know where that is, you can go to the Premiere Pro menu on Mac and go to Keyboard Shortcuts. On Windows, it's going to be under Edit Preferences, I believe, Keyboard Shortcuts. But the freeform view allows you to do a couple of different things. First of all, as the name implies, you can freeform organize content on screen and essentially storyboard content on this screen and build what will ultimately be a timeline in this view. Think of this like an infinite canvas. This is basically like an artboard, okay, in Photoshop or Illustrator, where you have a couple of cool options here. First of all, if I right-click on an individual clip, I'll try and zoom in so you can see the menu items here. All right, so first you can reset the clip size. Sorry, my face is blocked. So you have aligning to a grid, resetting to a grid, and clip size. So let's make this one clip extra large because I want this to be like my hero shot for the sequence. That's where we're going to start. Then we're going to segue to this, then this, then this, then this, something like that, okay? Maybe we'll tack this one on at the end too. So you can resize. Again, you can stack things together. You can snap media together. So if I hold down my Option or Alt key, you can see how I'm now snapping these clips together in a sort of grid-like way. So this allows me to take footage, like let's say all of these sort of landscapey shots, grab all four of these, and kind of move them around freely. I can also move them entirely off screen, right? Because again, this is an infinite canvas. So you might be asking yourself, well, again, do I need to work in this view? What are the benefits here? Well, it's entirely up to you. It's just a new, different way of organizing your story before you even get into a timeline, right? We haven't even gotten into the timeline yet, all right? It's just a different way to do that. And I just want you to be aware of those three views. So list, icon, and freeform. Now, the other thing is people ask, well, what's really the difference between icon and freeform? Icon is linear. So everything's going to be stacked. You can move stuff around. So I can click this and say I want this file to be here at the end. But everything's always going to be in this sort of grid pattern. You can't freely move this content around. You can also resize those thumbnails, right? Freeform, though, gives you just that, complete freedom over placement and positioning to, again, begin sort of aligning your story, all right? Now, we got one more settings thing I want to talk about before we actually build the timeline. Okay. Hold on, I'm watching. Jim is saying, I usually watch the incoming clips in the bottom left corner, not top left. I then blow it up with the tilde key. Yes, and again, that's entirely however you want to do it, right? Everybody has kind of their own way of how they view and import their content on screen. I happen to really love freeform because I like to sketch out my story. I was never big I always loved storyboarding, even sort of drawing storyboards. I love this though, just kind of once I have my footage, you know, find my content, assemble the basic story, and then drop it in a timeline, which we'll do. Before we get there, a couple more settings you need to be aware of. So again, on the Mac, Premiere Pro, Preferences. On Windows, Edit Preferences. Let's go into Preferences, Audio, Hardware. Now I point this one out because this is, again, one of those essential things you need to know. And depending upon the kind of machine you're running on, if you're just using a laptop with its native sound, you'll probably never really need to do any modifications to your audio. But if you're using an external sound device, which in my case, as you can see here, I'm working on a Focusrite Thunderbolt device. In this case, it's a Focusrite Claret 8X Pre. It's a 20 input or 18 input, 20 output device. This is where, you know, I choose the device that's going to handle the audio for the app. This is also where I choose the device class. Now, on the Mac side, there are no options. This really shouldn't be a drop-down. It's always going to be core audio. On Windows, however, you may encounter different driver classes. You might see something like VXD or, Lord help us, MME. I think there's another E ending one that I'm forgetting. And then there is ASIO, A-S-I-O. This is the standard. This is what you want to be using. If you're using a third-party sound device, unless it's driverless, if it's like a 1 or 2 input device, usually a standard USB audio driver is leveraged in both Mac OS and Windows. You may not have to do anything. But if you're using something like a Focusrite or PreSonus or Avid audio device or any of the other commercially available multi-input audio devices, typically they're going to offer for download an ASIO driver. And the reason you want that is that's going to give you the lowest latency. What is latency? It's the duration between hitting the space bar to play back and how soon you hear that audio. Or in the case of recording, how much delay there is from you saying hi to when it appears on screen. And obviously you want the shortest, lowest, smallest amount of latency possible. So if you're on Windows and you're finding that, playback is taking a second, or you're recording and it seems to be a bit delayed, you're probably not using ASIO drivers, or your buffer size needs to be readjusted, which we'll get to in a minute. Okay, so again, default input and output. In this case, it's saying what do we want for the default device here. I could choose that specific device. And you can see there's a couple of different ones available in here. You'll also see things like, like if you work in Teams or Zoom, they have kind of their loop back device. This is how you can send audio to those sources. All right, same for output as well. All right, your clock, again, you want the clock to be the same. Now, there are some instances where you may have a different input and output. Maybe you have, your input is like a USB mic, but the output is your standard speakers. In that case, you'd want the clock to follow the output. In general, you don't want to use different devices for I/O in terms of what you set here. If you don't have a synced clock in general, it can just be problematic later on. That's just that, and I don't like using the word best practice. Best anything that makes me half barf. But it's a really better choice to have the same device and clocking to the same device. And if you've got different input devices, like one's a Focusrite and the other's an Avid one, do not recommend that whatsoever. Unless you somehow have them linked digitally via SPDIF and you have their sample clocks locked together, not wise to have different devices. All right. And then we get to buffer size and sample rate. Okay. First sample rate, 48,000 hertz, 48K. This is the standard audio for video. You will almost never change this. All right. All of your standard DSLRs and mirrorless are going to shoot video with audio at 48K. That is the default. All right. You can, of course, change it. And Premiere supports up to 192K, right? For those of you working with extreme high sample rate audio. I don't know of too many people who are going to be doing that. Maybe 96. And again, 96K is really more for you're capturing the band, you're capturing the orchestra. You don't need to mix the movie audio in 96K. I mean, you can. There's no reason you can't. People do. Do 98.9% of humans notice any discernible difference? Nope, absolutely not. And do most editors even notice the difference? Well, maybe if they're complete audio nerds. But again, it just depends on what the content is, right? Yeah, if it's like the Avengers Endgame, we're probably mixing the whole thing in 96K. If it's not that, probably don't need that. It's going to make your files a little bit bigger. Sonically, unless you know how to listen for perceived airiness, you're not going to hear any difference. And it's just going to make all the audio that much bigger. And, potentially based on your sound device, could be a little more or less problematic for playing back that content as you add certain DSP effects. Now your buffer size, again, this is one of these things that you need to be aware of. The default, I think, is 256 or 512 on the Mac samples. Frankly, that's right at the threshold of almost too long. I would recommend 128 samples if your machine can handle it. If you're playing back and you're hearing little skips or the audio's not consistent, you need to raise that buffer, right? So this is going to be entirely system dependent. There is no use this number, it's going to work for you, unfortunately. I know Audition's default is 512. That is way too long. If you were to monitor yourself on a microphone, you'd hear a slapback. Hi, this is Jason. Too long, right? Make that buffer shorter. On Windows, this is communicated in milliseconds. I have communicated to the teams that these need to be unified because you can have samples in one place and milliseconds in the other. But the same applies. Start with the default and try and go lower, right? If you're hitting the space bar and it's taking 18 seconds for playback to start, your buffer is way too high. Okay? Very good. Okay. All right. Okay, let's see. Oh, Tim is, yes. Oh, there we go. So MME, Wasapi, that was the one I was thinking of. ASIO and Direct Sound. Thank you. Yes. Okay, excellent. All right. So let's get out of here. All right, and again, you've got lots of other settings in here. We're not going to go through every single one of these. Most of these, the defaults are just what you need. Oh, I'd say the one other one here is memory. This is just one to be sort of aware of, and we're going to come back to these as necessary. This one in particular is great because one, this shows you how shared memory allocation works with the CC apps. So I've got 64 gigs, right? And what this is saying is that I'm basically freeing up 12 of those gigabytes for everything else on my system. So as I'm working in Premiere, it's actively able to access 52 gigs. Now that 52 gigs is shared across After Effects, Premiere, Prelude, Media Encoder, Photoshop, and Audition, okay? So whatever is in focus is going to take advantage of that, but they're all going to be using that memory if you were running those apps simultaneously. But we're always leaving about 12 gigs free. So it's one of those, what do you want the ratio to be? And we typically say, or used to say, you want sort of at least 20 to 25% of your total memory available for other things, right? You can crank this up, or I should say crank it down, reserved RAM for other applications to 1 gigabyte, but then the OS only has a gig to function behind the scenes. I mean, if you're going to be doing anything else, it's just your performance is going to take a hit. So again, it's not an absolute. Can you do 70-30, 70 active app? Oh, sorry, my hands are in the wrong place. 70 active app, 30% background process? Sure. See what works. Again, there's not an exact figure here, but in general, if you've got like a 75-25, 70-30 balance, it's going to be a comfortable experience for you, all right? And we'll revisit this over time as well. Okay. All right, so let's get into, we've talked about starting the new project, GPU acceleration, a little bit on, again, workspaces, panels, just to real quickly here, quick overview if you're not familiar. How do you move panels around? It's as simple as clicking the title of a particular panel and then moving it around. And you'll see that I can dock it. So if I wanted to dock it among all of those other panels, I hold it in the center square, all right? If I wanted to say dock it alongside of, so this Lumetri color would be on the left and then all 3 of these other panels would be on the right, do it this way. On the bottom of, top of, right side of, you get the idea. If I were to leave it in the middle, again, it's gonna just dock this in the middle with these other panels here, okay? If I wanna put it back over there like that. Okay, dockable panels. Also worth pointing out, again, those hamburger menus. This is where you can choose to close. You can have the panels undocked entirely, so they can be free floating. Now, I work with 1 monitor. If you work with 2, 3, 4 monitors, you don't have to have everything snapped together, right? The UI snaps those panels together by default. You can have them undocked and floating, right? So if I were on another monitor, I could just drag this over to something else, or again, I have the option here to redock it inside. So however you want, it's just nice to know where those things are. There's also, again, in particular with things like Lumetri, this is where we'll get into this when we talk color, where you can, there's different save and export options for things like looks and LUTs. And we'll come back to this a little bit later. Okay, so let's build a sequence. Now we've got our footage in the project panel. We want to actually build a sequence. So how to do that? Okay, as with all things, multiple ways to do things in Premiere Pro. Easiest way, if you're in list view or whatever, if we just did like a single clip here, I can simply right click or control click on that single clip and I can choose new sequence from clip. And what is lovely about that is that it is automatically going to take all the attributes of that clip, the frame size, the frame rate, and the aspect ratio, and it's going to build a sequence with those attributes for me automatically. I don't have to do anything. It knows this is 25 frames per second, 1920, 1080 with a 1.0 pixel aspect ratio. It's correct. It does the right thing. Now, as mentioned before, we allow you to bring additional footage in. You can have mixed footage in a timeline. So let's say I wanted to take that, here's this San Francisco shot, and I want to drag this into this timeline. Okay, so this is just clicking and dragging now. I'm going to take this. I can drag it down here into the timeline, okay? Now, this footage that you're seeing is 1080. This footage is 4K. So it's too big. We're not actually seeing the entire frame. So a really easy way to scale this down to the size of this sequence Again, right-click menus. There's all kinds of right-click, control-click contextual menus in Premiere. Scaled frame size. All right. All right. Now you're seeing the whole frame, very simply. Just like that. This was one of the last times I was in SF pre-pandemic. That was a nice sunset on that day. Okay. Now, something else you may have just noticed, which is super awesome. This is one of these little features that a lot of people aren't even aware of that we have. So I'm going to go into our icon view for a second. I'm going to insert another piece of footage. Let's grab this one. If I simply take a piece of footage and hover over the program monitor, now you'll see I have these drop zones. So I can insert the footage before wherever my current cursor is. I can overlay, stick it on another track. I can insert it. I can replace, overwrite, or insert after. Okay? So if I wanted to insert after, let go, and it did just that. It placed this footage after the San Francisco footage. Okay? Super cool. So drop zones, again, I can do this one here. Insert before, insert, overlay. Maybe I want to overlay this one at this location. There it is, right? So now I've got these two. This one's overlaid over top. Maybe I was going to do a little split screen or something there. These drop zones are super cool, super fun. I like these way better than like the insert buttons, which I'll show you in just a second here, which I never use. This is one of those things that's been around for quite a few years. Most people don't even know about this. Super useful and a great way to, again, sort of individually drag elements into a timeline. Okay. Now, as mentioned, we can also use the freeform view. And I love this because in the case of this one here, I'm going to make my selection here. And with all of these clips selected, I'm going to right click here. And by the way, you can also just, if I select the first one, all right, I can do something like that as well. Right click, new sequence from clip. It's untilde. Now you'll see it's built that sequence and it has stacked that media. If I just scroll over here, right? So we have our friend here by the fence, our friend on the mountain with the keyboard, our friend with the horse, all right, our friend outside his house here, our friend in school. All right, everything is brought directly into the timeline in the storyboarded order, right? It is also worth pointing out, by the way, if you right-click in the gray or dead space inside of Freeform, you can save your storyboard as a layout. So if I go ahead and say, we're going to call this Storyboard 01, very creative. All right. And then, you know, I start bringing in other footage, or I start doing stuff with some of this other footage. Okay. I'm just making some changes here. And let's move this stuff around. I don't like that there. No, these are going to be individuals. I'm just trying to muck this about. You'll see why. Right click here, save as new layout. All right. So we'll call this Story 02. All right. And I can say, oh, what was that order we had before? We were telling the story with all the various characters there. I can go to Restore Layout. And I can say, bring us back to Storyboard 1. And now it's back to the default, or the way that it was when we saved. Great UX, great user experience, great design for that. Absolutely love that, all right? Okay, so now we have our footage in the timeline. This is exciting. We've got 6 more minutes. We're gonna talk timeline, and we're gonna talk buttons. Cool, sexy stuff. Let's check on our comments here. All right. Banderoism. Is there a minimal amount of RAM you'd recommend for Premiere? I'm working on an 8 gig RAM laptop. Yeah, so look, obviously a lot of that has to do with the footage you're working with. In 2022, I don't imagine anyone is shooting anything less than full HD, which would be 1920, 1080. Maybe you're still working in 720p. But that's really probably the lowest, right? 1280, 720 is going to be the lowest res you're going to be working in 2022. I don't even know if cameras that are going to shoot lower than that. I'd say 8 gig is the minimum. for anything, regardless of what you're working with. That's really the minimum. As you kind of increase, like if you were doing primarily 4K, I'd say for 4K, having experienced it on a variety of machines over the years, 16 gigs minimum. Now that's my recommendation. Can you do it on 8 gigs? Yes. Is the experience going to be delightful? Probably not. Right? Big footage, heavy. Now that's a good opportunity to use low-res proxies, right? Keep that media small and lighter on a slower machine or a lower-end machine with less RAM. That's the way to kind of combat that. You would absolutely want to use proxies in that instance. And I would even recommend it now, even if you're working in 1080 with 8 gigs of RAM, try proxies. You can find other videos of mine on my YouTube channel as well as on Creative Cloud around ingest with proxies. Did it recently. Performance will be exponentially better, all right? But something to consider. Okay. Okay, let's see what else we got here. I was watching the chat over here. Mustafa, storyboard. Mustafa, can you export that to a JPEG? Oh, you're talking about the freeform view. Haha. So unfortunately, not at present. This has been a feature request. So the only way to really do it would be to do like a screenshot of this. It is a feature request. I don't know if it's been filed. You'll want to do that. But speaking of taking frame grabs, in our last couple of minutes here, this is where we're going to get, before we get into the timeline and the tools, get into the button editor, because this is something important too that you need to be aware of. Okay, so in the program monitor, this is when you have a timeline. This is where the timeline, the sequence that you're working in down below. The program monitor is representing what you're seeing down here, okay? And a couple things you want to be aware of. First of all, obviously you have your time code. So this is your absolute time code here. You have your zoom level. So this is, how much of the footage are you fitting inside that program monitor? Again, I can shrink this down to 25%. I could say, let's make it 100%, which again, in this particular view, that's what 100% size is. So now I have my, my sliders here so I can sort of move and migrate around the footage. If I want to fit everything into view, I go into fit, all right? Then we have this drop down here. This is your playback resolution. And this is what we call fractional playback. And this is really important to our friend who was just talking about editing on an 8 gig machine. I'm currently in full quality. So that means I'm basically seeing every pixel as it was shot. We'll get into one other thing that you can do there to make sure that you're seeing every pixel, because this machine can handle this 1080 footage. If this were 8K, I probably couldn't view this in full quality. Now that doesn't mean I need to make a proxy necessarily, but it does mean that I can instead choose a fractional playback resolution, which is just going to give me better playback performance. So we're not doing anything to the footage. We're just showing you less pixels during playback. So when I go into play, do you notice right now this looks a little soft? And when I stop, it sharpens up. It's almost kind of hard to see. Let me go into 100%. So here, I'm just going to wind back. It's a little bit softer, right? Look at the eyes. But when I stop, it sharpens up. You can really notice it in the hair, right? Stop, sharp. Play, soft, stop, sharp. Okay? I'm viewing at 1/4 res, but when I stop, if I'm doing my color grading or correction, which you can see this is flat footage, which needs a LUT, now we're in full res. You can control the balance of the playback resolution and the paused resolution from the wrench menu that you see right here. All right, and there's a lot of settings in here. We're going to get into more of these in another episode, but this is where you can set your paused resolution and your playback. And actually, for most things, I usually edit in half res, but I always pause in full. So whenever I stop, I'm seeing the full resolution of my media. All right. The other thing, again, if you want to ensure that you're truly seeing every pixel, you want to have this high quality playback box checked. Okay, now you don't have to have that checked. If you have it unchecked, though, you will see a slight difference visually of your content inside the program monitor. All right. Now, one other thing in this program panel that I want to show you, the same thing you'll see in the source monitor as well, which, by the way, just to go there real quickly, just to shoot around, if you wanted to, say, set individual in and out points on a piece of footage, so I don't want the whole clip in a timeline, I want a piece of that clip. Let me quickly go into my Arizona rainbow here. Remember we talked about using I and O keys? So if you double click a piece of footage, it's going to open up in the source monitor. From the source, I can hit I. This is the start point, the beginning of where I want to add my footage. And then I can hit O as the end point. And then I can simply click on the clip and drag it into the timeline. Or again, I can use those drop zones as I showed you, like this. And I can add just that section of footage into my timeline. Again, this needs the frame size adjusted, okay? But that's yet another way to do that. Last thing here, the button editor. This plus sign, this is going to allow you to add the buttons that you see, your transport controls as you're working in Premiere. Now, as you can see, there are a couple dozen of them here. You don't need all of these viewed. To add buttons, now we're not going to go through all of them. You simply click on one and drag it down into the button editor wherever you want it to go and let go, and then it becomes a button. If you don't want it, you can drag it off. Same thing occurs, all right? So all of the various functions that you want, loop, playback, right? If you want to like loop your timeline, this is one that I always have. I use that all the time. Your standard transport controls, lift, extract, overwrite, insert, those buttons. I never used those, but that's where you can access those, and they all have keyboard shortcut equivalents, all right? Add those, customize, and now you have a way to, again, transport and work inside the timeline. But my friends, that is all the time we have for today. We've got the Daily Creative Challenge coming up in just a few moments, so stick around for that. To my friends at NFS, thank you for joining episode 1. Again, we've got multiple weeks of this. Next week, I'll have Victoria Nice joining me for getting started in After Effects. But that's all the time we have today, folks. Thank you so much. If you've got further questions, hit me up on YouTube and the Twitters. Until next time, have a great rest of your morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are in the world. And we'll see you again next time. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.